Hello, I'm Bill Russell, and this is the Lake Norman Chamber of Commerce Focus Friday, and we're going to be looking at one of our issues environmentally today. I'm going to turn the program over to Jeff Tarte, our 2022 Public Policy Chair. Jeff, it's yours.
Thank you, Bill. Today we have the pleasure of having Elizabethbiser with us, who's the Secretary of the Department of Environmental Quality, or as we call it for short, DEQ. And as we said, we got a little bit of time crunch this morning because the Madam Secretary has something that's come up at the last minute that's going to pull her away in about 25 minutes or so. So rather than go into her lengthy background, other than that she is a double Tar Heel, and perhaps maybe the youngest member of the governor's cabinet. I've known Elizabeth for over a decade now, working closely together, and this is a person I have the utmost respect for. This is an unbelievably qualified person who, I don't know what you do next, President of the United States at some point with your background. So let's just jump into it. I'd like you to maybe give us a little bit of insight to DEQ, and then we're going to jump into some questions before we let you run this morning.
That sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for inviting me to be here with you today. Always a pleasure to get to talk to you, and always fun to talk about the work of our department. I will tell you that Secretary Kinsley has me beat by 2 years. So
at DHHS.
That's right. So just so everybody knows, DEQ's mission is to provide science-based environmental stewardship for the health and prosperity for all North Carolinians. And so we do that in a variety of ways. From our regulatory work that most folks are familiar with, protecting air and water and land quality, to our non-regulatory assistance to businesses and local governments that includes grants for water and wastewater infrastructure, electric school buses, and charging infrastructure, and environmental education, and a whole lot more. So across all of these initiatives, there are a few things that are top of me that I thought I would highlight this morning as we work to serve the residents of the state. So first of all, clean air and clean water are fundamental to the public health and the quality of life for North Carolinians. And what I tell the team, frequently as we talk about these issues is that if you don't have clean air to breathe or clean water to drink, then literally nothing else matters. And I believe that we can protect our air and our water while we also support a healthy economy. There are a lot of big, complex issues, especially when it comes to environmental issues. And I believe it takes everybody working together to reach those goals. Throughout my career, one of the things I found has been most successful is making sure you bring stakeholders together to tackle tough issues, to build consensus and to find innovative solutions to problems. And there's a real power in partnership when you bring people together from different walks of life and different perspectives to find common ground. And that all starts with good communication. So that's how I've tried to approach this role as the DEQ Secretary. It's important to hear all voices and all viewpoints because it makes your decision making a lot better. So engaging with stakeholders and communities is also a key part of addressing environmental justice and equity issues. And that's a crucial part of what we do at DEQ, is to make sure that all voices are heard, especially those from historically underserved communities. And I can tell you from personal experience in my year that I've been on the job that public engagement and input from community members as a result of our work on environmental justice has broadened the perspectives and conversations at DEQ, and it's helped inform our actions. And quite frankly, it's made us a better agency. It helps us to respond more effectively to all the people that we serve. And it's clear that more proactive community engagement on the front end also leads to better outcomes and fewer issues down the road. So we are working proactively on tools to help the business community and others just make it easier to have some best management practices on how to engage with communities early on and try to smooth that road. A key factor in serving the public better is also streamlining and modernizing the way that we do our work. It's 2022. And we should be offering online services for just about everything, including submitting and tracking permit applications. My predecessor, now Administrator Regan, used to say, if you can track a pizza, you should be able to track a permit. That's one of my favorite sayings, and I have stolen it without any hard feelings on that one. This project is currently underway. I'm very proud to say I'm glad that we got legislative funding for it in last year's budget. And the first permit on the new system should go live in a couple of months. And I'll add that when we're going through this process of putting permits online, we're not just taking what's on paper and inputting it into an online form and hitting send. What's taking a while is we're actually reviewing the processes. We're looking at if 98% of people get a question wrong and we have to send it back for additional information, then maybe we need to change the question. So that thought process and making sure that we've got good, effective systems in place is going into that system as well. Could not be happier about that, that system going in. But to me, modernization goes beyond permitting. So we're also taking a close look at our processes to identify any inefficiencies that we have, and we're constantly trying to innovate. You know, just because we've always done something a certain way doesn't mean that it's the best way to do it. And so a good example of where we're putting that into practice in a big way is in our handling of water infrastructure funding. So I don't know if everybody realizes North Carolina is extraordinarily well positioned with our federal funding. Our state, I was with my colleagues a couple of weeks ago, I learned our state got $1 billion more just through the ARPA funding for water and wastewater infrastructure than the next closest state. And we're also handling the funding a lot more expeditiously. So I'll give you an example. In addition to the $1.7 billion that the Governor and General Assembly approved last year, this year, another $611 million was in the budget for water and wastewater infrastructure. Governor signed the budget on a Monday, and by that Thursday, we had already awarded 96% of the unearmarked funds from that budget. Wow. So in total, we awarded $789.4 million in water and wastewater funding for 385 projects across the whole state. And we know that water infrastructure is important because you can't have good economic growth if you don't have infrastructure in place. You also need to make sure people have clean, access to clean drinking water. So 5 of the projects that we approved are connecting communities to public water that have never been connected before. Over 800 homes are going to be connected to public water for the very first time. And a lot of those homes have been experiencing issues of contamination. So we could not be more proud of the fact that we not only got the funding out the door quickly, but also equitably. There's a lot more, Jeff, that I could say about DEQ and so many issues that we're working on, but I definitely want to make sure we leave time for questions. So I'll just maybe conclude with saying that when I look at my top priorities as Secretary of DEQ, it's this. It's making sure we're not leaving communities behind, modernizing and streamlining the agency so that we can be interact more efficiently and effectively with our partners and our stakeholders, and making sure that we employ a mindset of working together to find consensus on solutions to tough issues. So with that, Jeff, I'll pause and look forward to answering some questions.
Great. And I'll try to be respectful of your time, and I'm watching the clock here. But to say representation doesn't matter when you mention North Carolina getting over $1 billion. Having you sitting in the chair that you're sitting in, and as you said, having Michael Reagan, your predecessor, who is now running, a lot of people may or may not know, is running EPA under President Biden. I got to guess you two make a difference for North Carolina, and that's truly appreciated. But DEQ, everybody, we think about human services, we think about DMV, and so NCDEQ, they're going to get a lot of notoriety. Everybody knows the impact. But DEQ, a lot of people probably won't even have heard an acronym before and aware of your department, yet you guys touch every life every day in the state. Are there a few things, because it's really a wide host of departments and things, almost a dozen departments, areas within DEQ, anything in particular that most people wouldn't know about DEQ that you could share?
Sure. A lot of people think about us, like you said, in terms of regulatory, air permits or water quality permits, but we also have some programs that I always love to brag on, our environmental stewardship initiative. And since this is the Chamber of Commerce, I'm going to make a plug. This is a great program that's actually in its 20th year. We're celebrating the 20th anniversary this year. But what it does is it takes companies and organizations that want to go above and beyond minimum regulatory requirements and want to be stewards of the environment because they realize that it helps people, profit, and planet. And what we do is we provide a lot of resources, and this is a completely free program. Why everybody in the state doesn't take advantage of it, I'm not quite sure, but we do have a really robust list of folks who are in the program. But we start out as there's partners, rising stewards, and stewards. and folks can work their way up in the program, but we provide resources on environmental compliance, on environmental systems, the ISO 14001, ISO 50001 for a lot of energy. Requests are coming in these days of helping folks become more energy efficient. But we provide that technical assistance, help folks along, and they also mentor each other. So you can have a company who's figured out a solution to, say, a waste problem. They'll invite others in to come see how they did it. And so it's a great just network of folks who are really looking at how do they go above and beyond and realize the economic and environmental benefits that come from that. And I like it because it keeps people off of our doorstep that have problems. So it's a great example of being proactive and trying to avoid problems before they start. We also are a huge grant making agency, and that's only gotten bigger in the past year as we're handling billions of dollars in infrastructure funding. But we also administer the Volkswagen settlement, looking at electric school buses, electric transit buses, charging infrastructure, which is a great program, and we are in the second year of that, or second phase of that. We also administer things like the weatherization program. So we work with our colleagues at DHHS, but we work to help low-income families with weatherization assistance through our state energy office. So there's a lot of aspects. We also oversee recycling for the state. So, there's a lot of aspects that are non-regulatory that folks don't think about a lot when they think of DEQ.
So we're the chamber up in the Lake Norman region, representing mainly 4 communities around. We have almost 1,000 businesses that participate. A lot of people don't recognize us. Those businesses combined employ multiple hundreds of thousands of people, literally multiple hundreds of thousands of people these people employ. And they're interacting with you. Anything for the businesses, and particularly maybe even the smaller to medium-sized business owners, that you would want them to know about DEQ, how you can be a help.
I think one thing I would say is know that we are here to help, and we are here to help folks navigate the process. We have our Division of Environmental Assistance and Customer Service can help answer questions for folks whenever you don't know what kind of permits you might need. Always better to ask first and let us help you. We also are really working, I mentioned modernization earlier and streamlining. What we're really trying to do right now is make sure that we are making the department easier to do business with and easier to interact with, which is making it so that hopefully, as we get through this online permit system, that you can log on and in one place see where all your permits are, where they are in the process, pay your permit fees online. So we are working towards making that interaction a lot easier. But we are here to work through issues with folks, and always welcome the phone call to say, hey, I've got a question, or I might have a problem. Always better to raise your hand on the front end and work with us than to wait until things get to the point where it's hard to come back from.
Well, and you mentioned 2 items earlier in a previous comment, and it shows the spectrum and complexity of things on a very large scale to a very small scale. Being, you mentioned the Volkswagen settlement. We'll explain that to everyone and point down, but how that impacts, putting charging stations, having funds available to help the EV exercise. You mentioned weatherization. We have a community in Cornelius, Smithville, which has levered that program to a great extent for the benefit of the homeowners. And that represents a lot of different issues just in those 2. What do you see, because you're in this every day now, the biggest environmental issues that we see facing North Carolina in the immediate future?
The biggest issue facing North Carolina from an environmental standpoint right now, beyond looking at kind of the big things of climate change and resilience and increasing storm events, is also PFAS. So looking at emerging contaminants, and PFAS specifically is affecting.
And why don't you explain what PFAS is for the listeners?
Yeah, so PFAS, you'll also hear them referred to as forever chemicals. And they are a special type of chemical. They have short chain and long chain carbons. I won't get into a chemistry lesson, I promise. But the key thing is that these are man-made chemicals that persist in the environment, persist in the body. And so unlike you typically think about the traditional things that we regulate, you'll hear about natural attenuation or things that you expect to break down over time, through just pollution, and then over time they break down and into their constituent elements, and things become less hazardous. For forever chemicals, they don't break down. And so it's like toothpaste out of a tube. Once they're in the environment, they're in the environment, and they have to be filtered out, which is very costly, and then destroyed. And that technology is ongoing, and we're learning about how to get them destroyed because they persist in the water cycle. And Jeff, that's one of the things that, as I just dug into this issue more, is a little, quite frankly, frightening to think about. So, what we find is that it can go up through air, so from air emissions, and then it can have either wet or dry deposition, either through rain or just through kind of falling out into the air.
Right.
For example, with Chemours, and that's what most people think about when they think of PFAS in North Carolina, is the Chemours facility in the Fayetteville area. And so, for example, from an air standpoint, we have found groundwater pollution caused by air emissions as far away as 17 plus miles away from the plant, looking at prevailing wind patterns. So that's part of it. Then it gets in the groundwater, it can get in the surface water, right? It just persists in the environment without ever breaking down. And so right now, to use Chemours as an example, in November 3rd, we, I don't know if folks in the region are familiar with what happened, but about 5 years ago, a chemical called Gen-X, which is a PFAS compound, was discovered.
Senator Lee would be familiar.
Senator Lee is very familiar. It was found in the Cape Fear River, and it was one of those things. And if you think about what keeps me up at night, it's what else is out there like this, right? Where you have a situation, people depend on the Cape Fear River for water supply. There's also a lot of groundwater wells in Eastern North Carolina where folks are just drinking, water. There's no filtration. And I should mention that traditional filtration does not take PFAS out of the water. You have to look at reverse osmosis systems or granular activated carbon systems, both of which are very costly. So that we were testing around the plant for the first few years. November 3rd, we ordered downstream assessment for the count for Cumberland and for Columbus, Pender, Brunswick, and New Hanover counties. And so we already have nearly 80 homes as of last week. I'm waiting for my numbers today, that have been placed on bottled water because the levels in their wells, 200 miles away from the facility, are at levels that they shouldn't be drinking their water and are going to be provided with filtration options. So it's a pretty wide swath of southeastern North Carolina that's dealing with this, but PFAS itself is actually found in a much broader region. So Chemours is one example, and their compounds are specific to their company. And so we can kind of tell where their compounds have gone, but their traditional legacy compounds, you might hear the terms PFOA and PFAS, that are actually found throughout the state. And so we're in the process right now of evaluating which water systems have PFOA and PFAS at levels that are above what EPA is considering safe. And their health advisory that they came out with recently was 4 parts per quadrillion for PFOA and 20 parts per quadrillion, which is a new term. Usually you hear parts per trillion. This is quadrillion. So basically, any level of exposure constitutes an increase in risk for cancer and other health-related issues. So it's a complex issue. That was a long explanation, but it's one that has the potential to impact a lot of North Carolinians. And so we are, the science is evolving. We are making sure that our data is keeping up, because we always want to make sure we're making decisions based on the available data and the science and our regulations. And so we are paying close attention to all of that.
Well, we're going to pivot just slightly then, picking up on, since you mentioned ground contaminants and how that potentially, those things can be detrimental to our water sources and stuff. Not too long ago, we were dealing with coal ash, which I think we've got a solution and a path forward for it. But most recently, I would, whether you're familiar, is the Colonial pipeline spill here in our backyard. And maybe if you can share, what would DEQ's role be in that kind of situation? And depending on the degree and currency, any updates or thoughts about that specific incident?
Sure. No, that is an issue of utmost importance to your area for sure. And this is a very important issue to DEQ too, because again, our responsibility is making sure that there's clean water, that the environment is protected. And you may have seen recently that per Colonial's numbers, that they're estimating the release to be 2 million gallons. That does place it as the largest on-land oil spill in the history of the country.
Really? Wow.
a lot of folks don't realize it. It is a very large spill. So our role in this process, Jeff, is the cleanup of the contamination and overseeing and coordinating that with Colonial. And so we recently entered into a consent order with them that governs that process. So we are, making sure that it's being, that the cleanup is being done in with regards to what our rules and regulations are of cleanup standards, and we are coordinating with the company to make sure that that cleanup's done in the best way possible. So we are on top of that. We've got folks who are working on that every day and making sure that we get hopefully a good result for the residents of that area.
I appreciate it. That's insightful. The other one, kind of a related area a little bit, is solar. And just curious, because we've been a big solar provider. We climbed up the ranks, and just curious what your thoughts are, where the state's position is relative to solar renewables, wraps, those sorts of things, if you can speak to a little bit, just briefly.
Sure. So I'll start out kind of big picture that Utilities Commission decides what the mix of electricity is. And so from our perspective,
You say mix being the source of?
The sources of electricity, right? So whether that that mix is nuclear or coal or renewables, or natural gas, they're looking at, for example, Duke's carbon plan right now. So if folks are not familiar, the legislature, and there was a bipartisan bill passed on this issue called House Bill 951 last year that we're all very proud of. It's what it does is it sets a goal and a target for 70% carbon reduction from the electricity generation sector by 2030 and net carbon neutral by 2050. But that process is playing out at the Utilities Commission. And so our role is really, I will tell you that we are, of course, big supporters of renewable energy because it's cleaner for the environment. It has better health outcomes, better outcomes for our air quality, our water quality, but it also, as you point out, it's also a big economic driver for the state. So we've got a lot of rural communities that have really benefited from things like solar. But what we do is Sarah Energy Office actually does a lot of support. We have a lot of expertise within the agency to advise folks. But we don't regulate any of the sources. So we will do federal consistency reviews for things like wind, offshore wind. And our Division of Coastal Management coordinates with all the federal agencies to make sure that proposals are consistent with our rules and regulations and the rules and regulations of our sister agencies. But we don't actually have a regulatory role when it comes to most of that, unless you're building a project that requires like a sedimentation and erosion control permit or something to do with construction.
One last area to talk about briefly, and we got a couple questions. We'll try to wrap up because I know you need to run. I think the president's calling you this afternoon. The other big R, and now we've talked about renewables that have a big footprint, but the other one on our day-to-day, our front yard, our houses, is a big deal to me, is recycling. And in our community, over the years, it used to be, the garbage bin was the great big one, and it was always full or overflowing when we took it to the curb, and the recycling were a little bucket. Now, it's reversed. But we see, it's moving. It's a moving target, the whole recycling. I see us maybe backing away a little bit, or I hear difficulty about what can be recycled. Where are we on that? And is that something, is that a DEQ responsibility and concern? But I would think recycling's just got to be a huge issue going forward for us.
Well, Jeff, as you may know, I spent 2 years prior to coming to this position working at a national recycling nonprofit. So this is one of my favorite issues to talk about. But when it comes to recycling, we had some trouble a few years ago. Some folks may remember the term, the China national sword. So a lot of our recyclables especially paper and plastics, used to go to China. And then China started saying, nope, we're not taking any more. It's too contaminated. And the problem had been that we had really neglected a lot of the quality control measures, the education, the infrastructure in our country to make sure that we've got clean material on the other side. So putting it in your bin at home is really just one step of the process. And that does not constitute recycling. That's separation, right? And that's collection when you put it at your curb. But for true recycling, that material needs to be made into a new product and to continue its useful economic life. So that means that there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to take place and be invested in. And we have seen, in the wake of China National Sword, we have seen incredible domestic investment in things like paper processing and plastic processing and others. And we've worked with glass industry, for example, to address, because glass can be something that's a little bit harder because of its weight. It's the economics can be a little bit tougher. But one of the things we really are focusing on is how do we help material recovery facilities address their infrastructure so that they have the latest technology to help create a clean stream. You also have to work on education for residents to make sure that they know how and to recycle right, because you want to make sure that they're not wish cycling, which is putting things in the bin that they wish they could recycle. So we have worked with communities to tailor education programs based on the types of recyclables that are taken in their area, because that's a really important component. But we also need to look at, addressing rural collection. So a lot of, if you think about it, a lot of this is a logistics issue, right? And so whenever you're located further away from a material recovery facility, it can be more expensive. And so that's why you see, especially through the pandemic and as there were some budget issues, some local governments chose to stop recycling programs, not as many as you would think, thank goodness. I believe we had maybe about 17 of the state that had stopped. But we're working, some of those are getting back online and we're working with the others. So we have a support role that we play with local governments in carrying out and establishing or reestablishing their programs. We work with the material recovery facilities, which is where all that sortation takes place, to provide support to them. And we actually give out grants too, to both local governments and to businesses that are employing North Carolinians in our state to be part of that recycling economy. And then we also are looking at end markets, because again, in order to complete that cycle, you have to make sure it's getting to somebody who's going to use it. And North Carolina has actually one of the largest concentrations of end markets in the country. So we are very well positioned to have a strong recycling economy. We're excited because there's federal funding available for the first time in a very long time. So there's $75 million available for education and about $275 million available to help support programs. And so we've been weighing in with comments to help hopefully guide decisions on how that gets spent, because we want to bring some of that to North Carolina. But there's a lot of bright spots ahead. It's just sometimes it can be a little cyclical, especially given the global dynamics.
Well, Madam Secretary, we're up against your time clock. I know we need to get you to another meeting. I've got one last question for you, and a lot of people, I'm going to quasi-violate the rule of speaking about a woman's age, but you're not even 40 yet. You obviously have a brilliant mind. You have the breadth and depth of things that your issues you deal with is mind-boggling. And you truly are an expert on a number of subjects, and you are well respected throughout the state of North Carolina and the General Assembly, and obviously the governor has great confidence in you. But this is a role, as we all know, doesn't last very long. It has an end date. You cannot retire being the Secretary of DEQ. So you've got a few years, and you are a very young person. What are the types of things you see yourself you'd like to be doing down the road?
Jeff, you're right. This isn't, if you're counting, and I count frequently, it's 2 years and 4 months that I've got left in this role. I will tell you that this is a role that I have, this is my dream job right now. I will tell you that. I pitch myself that I get to do this every day, and I could not be happier to get to spend my days working on the mission of this agency. I'm not really thinking about what comes next right now. I certainly love public service. And I certainly love the environment. And so I'll certainly look for ways to continue giving back. Just don't know what role that will take yet.
All right. Well, it's again an absolute pleasure to have you, Madam Secretary. So we'll let you run and keep our environment safe, as you always do.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to talk with y'all.
All right. Thank you. Bill, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you, Jeff. And this program is made possible through the generosity of Novant Health. They're our presenting sponsor, and normally we have our presenting sponsor say something up front, and we've saved it for the last. So Deepa, we have you on board, Deepa Johnson, who is with Novant Health, Huntersville Medical Center. The last time we spoke, COVID numbers had gone up, but I think things are settling back down. And share a little bit about what's going on in a healthcare picture, but also specifically, what are some things going on at Novant Health here in Huntersville?
Yeah, Bill, you're absolutely right. We are starting to see our COVID numbers kind of leveling off, less hospitalizations, which is good. But at a broader spectrum, one thing I wanted to tell you guys is we officially launched, had our ribbon cutting ceremony for the Huntersville, new Huntersville Pediatric Emergency Services Department. So we are very excited about that. We had a big ceremony yesterday. It is a $2.4 million project that was funded 100% by donors and the community. So we're very fortunate, very grateful to bring these services to the Lake Norman community, and very excited to kind of see how this kind of takes off. But each room is, we worked in partnership with a lot of the NASCAR drivers. Martin Truex is our big donor. Each room is designed to make a kid feel at home when they have something scary going on. So we're very excited about that, but just wanted to bring that, and just let you guys know that we've got so many exciting things happening at the hospital.
And Deepa, I got to look at that, an unveiled look when we had our leadership Lake Norman. So I saw some of those rooms, and again, they're really, really nice. And so that's fantastic. Jeff, we had one of our new members join us today, Ed Watkins Marina, since we were talking about lake issues, and he was on, and he's going to be bringing his marina. He's got a Denver location now, but at the Warena Marina. So again, great having Ed on board to see some of the things the secretary was talking about. What's on tap for September?
September, we have one of our own, John Marino, who is, as you well know, is the Chief Executive Officer, founder, and owner of Old Mecklenburg Brewery, OMB, which I keep well stocked at home. But with John coming on, I think this will be an interesting perspective. Obviously, they're building another facility here in Cornelius that will be an amazing amenity, as well as a large employer. A lot of people don't realize OMB is the largest craft brewer in the state of North Carolina. They are just grown incredibly. But the other aspects from a public policy side, we'll get a little bit of insight what it's like to be an entrepreneur and grow a business, but also because of the industry they're in, the regulatory issues of what we'll talk about is the three-tiered system in alcohol and beverage industry, and understand what he has had to go through to navigate the regulatory environment to be able to grow his business as a private business owner. It is an amazing story, and more importantly, it's a really good lesson for other business owners around. So John will be our guest next month.
Well, looking forward to that. And I'm glad you touched on the Colonial Pipeline issue in Huntersville. That is a huge issue for us here at the lake. And so thank you for asking that question. Deepa, again, thank you to Novant for being the presenting sponsor of this program. And we hope everyone has a fantastic week at the lake. See you.